So guys, okay, it's 4 o'clock and I think it's time to start because I have a lot to tell and show. For those of you who were in Memmingen in October, some of this presentation, I have a few PowerPoint slides, is the same as what I've shown in Memmingen, but I want to show you the not finished product, but at least the current stage of the product in this session. So you have an idea of what you can do with the XSharp RDD, SQL RDD. Okay, what I have on the agenda is, well, you can read why, some of the design principles, some of the challenges that we have. I want to spend a lot of time on examples and show how you can use this in your app. And availability, well, it's in beta now, so that's obvious. Okay. Why would we want to do a SQL RDD? Well, if you move apps from the desktop to other platforms, you usually don't have a file system that you can access. So if you want to have data, you need to get data through, in general, to SQL cursors, from a SQL database. But many of us are used to the familiar DBF approach, a cursor approach, where you basically work with a table and you have records. So it's nice if you can still do that and talk with SQL databases. Another reason why we want to do this is because SAP is no longer developing ADS, Advanced Database Server. So we are still selling it, but it's not supported, and there's no new development done. So what people are looking for is because ADS is kind of special. It combines both index sequential access to data and SQL access to data. So what some of our customers are looking for is a replacement for SAP, because for ADS of SAP, because it's no longer available. So what we intended to do is offer something like that. Now, the approach could be to start with a RDD that we have and put SQL on top of it. But writing a SQL engine, that's not something that we were looking for. So what we wanted to do is not write our own SQL engine. It is a lot of work, and it's already done. There are dozens or maybe more SQL engines on the market, and why reinvent the wheel? In the whole XSharp project, we try to avoid reinventing the wheel, so in this case do. And we want to create an RDD that supports the database that you like. So not our database, but the database that you have a preference for. So we wanted our RDD not to have hard links to third-party assemblies. It should be open, and you should be able to use the database provider that you want. So when I announced the beta, I already got a few requests for supporting Postgres. Well, I have no experience with Postgres, but it was not too much work to add Postgres because there's Postgres support in the .NET framework. So what we've done is we built it, we created our RDD on top of ADO.NET. And ADO.NET is not what people think of ADO like you have in the common environment. ADO.NET is basically an incorrect term, but it describes a database access layer that's part of .NET. The .NET framework and also .NET 5, 6, 7 contain classes, and these are base classes, and any database provider can add its own layer on top of these classes. We have developed our RDD on top of this common layer, and in real life, you will never use what's called a DB connection, but you will use a specific connection for specific database. So that's what we wanted to do. We created on top of ADO.NET, and by doing that, we are not linked into a certain vendor, but we are open. Since many of you have experience with ADS, we want to have a bit of the same logic. So if you connect to a database, we give you the same kind of functionality that you have for ADS. So you can open a connection, you get a handle, and you can use this handle further in your code to close the connections, do other things. But of course, we program object-oriented. So those handles are there, but you can also use the underlying objects. For ADS, that's not possible because ADS is written in C++, and to use your C++ objects in your or XSharp code is impossible. But since we are running in .NET and the RDD is created with .NET, you can have the objects too. Okay. What are the challenges if you want to do this? Well, the biggest challenge is that none of the databases is exactly the same. Each provider has added special syntax for things on top of the standard SQL. For example, how do you create auto increment columns? How do you select a certain number of rows? The create table, create index syntax is different. If you have reserved words like word index, it could be a column name, but to use that, you need to put special characters around it to make sure that it doesn't is not seen as a keyword. These prefix and suffix characters are different for different database vendors. Also, functions are different, or even the operator to concatenate two strings is different. So those were challenges that we have to work with. And what we wanted to do is make a generic solution and allow for a specific database to override the behavior. One of the things we had to do is, how do you translate X-based index expressions to SQL? Assume you have an index on customer code plus string order date. Sorry, date to string order date. You need to somehow translate that, especially if you do seeks, and it becomes even more complicated if you do partial seeks. So we have to add a mechanism to translate X-based index expressions to SQL. Also, in a table-based environment, we used to work with record numbers, and we have something like a delete flag. SQL doesn't have record numbers. By definition, SQL databases, rows, they may be physically ordered in the database, but there is not the concept of a record number. Some databases give you the ordinal number in the current result set, where the first row is 0 or 1, and it continues after that, but that's a relative number. If you want to emulate something like record numbers, you need something that's unique and guaranteed. And we added support in the RDD to do that. And also another challenge is, where are the indexes and index expressions defined? In your X-base environment, you have CDX files or NTX files, and those files contain the expressions that are used to create the indexes. SQL works a bit different because SQL indexes are stored on the server, and each server has its own mechanism for that. And they also don't use expressions like we. So you can have an index on customer number and order date, but there's not an expression like customer number plus date to string order date. It is simply customer number, order date. So if you want to emulate X-based behavior and you want to emulate sticking on a string from the customer number plus the order date, we have to have a mechanism, because your seeks will send in a string and it has to be parsed so that it works with basically it results in a scope or something like that, so you can find rows. So those are challenges that we have to handle in the RDD. First challenge is, the biggest challenge is differences between database management systems, DBMSs. What we have done in the RDD is we created a special class layer that contains provider-specific functionality. And there's a base class called SQL DB Provider, which has some base implementations. And on top of that, or derived from that, are several subclasses that implement specific behavior. Like I said before, ADO.NET already has different databases support, and what they have defined in AD.NET is that someone who provides a AD.NET data provider needs to have a special class, what's called a DB provider factory class. And that DB provider factory class can be specific for Oracle, Postgres, SQL Server, and it has methods to create connection objects, command objects, etc. This is our entry into the provider-specific DLL. So each SQL DB provider has properties that describe which DLL to load and which factory object to retrieve. And by doing that, we can be generic. So this DB provider, SQL DB provider class, the most important ones are the DLL name and the type name of the DB provider factory class. Let's show some code and demo the code. Okay. Let me go to another screen. Okay, this is a standard framework app, .NET framework app. And if I want to work with XSharp and the SQL RDD, we need to add a reference. So those of you who are part of the beta have been able to download the why am I not seeing add reference? Okay, on my hard drive, I have downloaded the beta. Where is it? SQL RDD beta 1. I'm going to use the SQL RDD. This particular class, by the way, there's a help file that comes with it and it describes all those classes. But it has both the functions and the classes needed to work with the SQL RDD. Now, the first thing you want to do is tell the SQL RDD which provider to use. And let me show you how to do it in some other sample. Okay, we're here. Here I say, I want to use the SQL Server provider. This is one that's built in the RDD. And then what you want to do is connect to a database. Now, I'm going to do it like this. I'm going to do something with the standards. We'll get this. And I'm going to go to the Northwind database. This is a standard SQL Server database. And then I want to open a table. So I'm going to set my default RDD. This is the name, SQL RDD. This is standard DBF behavior, using functions, not using the class to keep it simple, but it works with both functions and classes. Now, what is the plan here? There is a table in the SQL database. Let's inspect the database. It's called customers. And I want to get column 1 and 2. So that should give me Alfred's Futterkiste. Now let's see if that works.
That's RDD set default, Robert.
Sorry?
It's RDD set default, not the RDD default.
Yeah, you're right. That's I think it's nice to show things by writing it like that, but of course you introduce problems. And this also introduces an endless loop. Why didn't anyone say that? And as you can see, I have now the database. So what's happening here? Are we fetching all the data? If you want to know, it depends on the database, but if you go to SQL Server, it has a tool called the SQL Server Profiler. It's now on the wrong window. Let's go. Need to move things around. Okay, here it is. And if I go back to my sample and run it again, and look at the profiler, you can see that the application over here, you can see it works with the .NET SQL Client data provider, does a select statement where 1 equals 0, and selects the top 1,000 from customers. So I have given it a name, customers, as a table name. And since this was a simple name, the RDD expects that you want to fetch data from a table with that name. But since it doesn't know which columns, it first does a select, the first one here. Where, do you guys see my screen, by the way? No.
Yeah, it's visible.
Oh.
Yes.
Okay. Where it just fetches 0 rows, that where clause 1 equals 0 returns 0 rows, so I can get the column information. And after that, we fetch a limited amount of data. Now, the question is, of course, why are we doing this? Well, first of all, the database could be really big. And it's kind of stupid to retrieve 1 million rows. So that's why we limit ourselves. But of course, I want to give you control so you can decide what data to fetch from the database. And that is the second layer that we introduced in the RDD. It's a layer that retrieves that you can use to control which columns to fetch, how many columns to fetch, if you update, how to create the where clause, which column should be included in the where clause, etc. I'm not going to read all the options because it's in the documentation. I advise you to look, but that is basically what you look for. Now, when you connect to the database, you need to specify a connection string. In my sample, I'm using, this is a typical SQL Server connection string. And I'm taking a trusted connection, which has to do with how I log on, the server name, and the database name. If you connect to Postgres, you need a different connection string. But this connection string is literally passed to the backend. And I'm getting an HCon here. I'm not doing anything. But of course, we should probably do this because it's a good habit to close connections. And if you do it the proper way, you probably also do a try catch in there with a finally, so you always close the connection even when there's an exception. See a sample program later where I've used that. But the basic is you set the provider. Now, I could have also used another provider here, but of course then I need another connection string. This provider name is internally in the RDD is linked to the specific provider for SQL Server. And the documentation has a list of provider names that are already in there. You can also create your own provider if we haven't given you the right provider yet. And we, of course, we will gladly help you if you want to do that. And you can register your provider with the RDD there's basically a dictionary in there which has a name, the class name, and then when we need it, we instantiate the class, we get to the DB provider factory from ADO.NET, and we open the connection, etc. Everybody with me so far? Okay. Good. In the connection string, we allow you to do some extra settings in there. Look in the documentation if you want to see what exactly. But for example, if you have a column with, let's say, 100 characters in the database and only 10 are filled, do you want to have 90 spaces as a trailing space, or do you want the column to be retrieved as a trimmed value? It depends on your app. And we give you the option to set some global options in the connection string, how it works. The same is true, for example, for column names that are longer than 10 characters. If you work with DBF files, the column names are limited to 10 characters. But SQL databases often have longer names because they don't have this restriction. By the way, FoxPro files in combination with the database, the DBC file, also allow longer column names. You can specify this at the connection string level. There are also other ways to do that. The last bullet here is when you open a connection, you can specify what's called an event handler. And the event handler will communicate with the app so you can see what's happening. Let's just expand my sample. I have an event handler in this code. So I'm going to put it in here. The event handler needs to be a function or a method with specific syntax. And it needs to receive two parameters, and it needs to be as a return type as object. What it gets is an object. I don't expect you to do much with the object, but it is common in .NET that event handlers get the object of the sender, and maybe you may want to look at that. You get an object of type SQL RDD event args, and this is basically contains three values. First is the name of the table or the name of the connection that you're working with. The second is the reason, it's an enum, and the third one is the default value. So the value that the RDD thinks is the correct one, but in your event handler, you can manipulate this value. Now let's see what happens if I change my application. We see now the first event that's called, it says, okay, this default, this is the connection. And it gives me the connection string. This is the connection string that was passed through the connect function. And in this event handler, I can override it. Then the event handler asks for some default values. And these, by the way, are also settings that you can include in your connection string. So what is the default value for updates? Are updates allowed? What's the default value for the column that emulates the deleted flag, etc.? These are all, so these lines are all default values for the connection. And then we see that it opens the table connection and it asks for the real name because you can specify aliases. Let's assume your database has invoices, but in certain situations you just want to have the open invoices. Now, you could declare a table, pseudo table, open invoices, but then tell the RDD the real name is invoices, but there's a property here, server filter, and you can tell it, okay, I want to filter the invoices and just return the ones where, let's say, paid date is null. So you can filter it by that. It's a bit like a view, but then a view which you can do in code. And again, it asks for the max records, column list, etc. By default, it will fetch all columns, but you can tell it, no, I don't want all columns. It wants to know which columns are updatable. It wants to know the key columns. Key columns can be used if you want to do an update. You may not want to include all the columns, but for example, if you have unique ID, let's say, okay, I want update statements and delete statements to only use the ID and not use the complete column list. That makes it easier, basically. The generated select statement or update statement is a bit easier like that. And then you see there's a command text. This is where it retrieves the columns, and then it does another command text, and then finally it fetches the data. So the callback function, or method, if you implement it as a method, has the chance to do things. So we could, for example, specify that we do not want all columns, but we just want to have customer ID and company name. So you could do it like this. Come on, why you didn't? I don't have IntelliSense.
Robert, probably because of the namespace. Do you have a using?
I have implicit namespaces enabled.
Ah,
Event arcs reason.
I think column names is misspelled, I think.
SQL RDD event reason.
yeah, it's a missing N in column names.
Ah,
Somebody else said it, not me.
I should have found it, but let me to be sure. I need to don't. I shouldn't do this in code. Let's forget this. Okay, I'll just won't do it. But you can specify whatever you want. What was the name? It is column list. Okay. Now you see, because I specified the column list, and now my select statements is only limited to the 2 columns that I specified in my column list. So by doing that, you can basically tell the RDD what you want to do. Now, in the RDD, we've created different mechanisms to control this. The default mechanism is through an INI file, or if you specify an event handler, through the event handler. We've added a third mechanism, and that is you can put a special table in the database and use this table to return the information. So the RDD will fetch the data directly from the database. I would say that's the recommended method because it's part of the database. But of course, you're free to use whatever you want. What I've shown so far is use customers, etc. You can also run the RDD in the what we call the query mode, where you specify a complete select state. That works too. The difference is that the data is fetched immediately, where in table mode, we wait with fetching until you, for example, do a go top or until you do a seek. But the query mode just fetches the data. It's also read-only, where in table mode is read-write. But we support both. Now, maybe in the future we will support updates for the query mode as well. But since query mode may include joins, it can become quite complicated to produce the right update statement. So if we will ever support updates in query mode, we'll probably use a kind of callback mechanism so you can generate the update statements yourself. Okay. Query mode is something like this. Again, but we said you give it the query and you give it an alias and it works like a normal cursor. So if we would look at this sample, something like this. And now we get only the columns that have a custom ID that starts with A. So you also see that the callback for column list, etc., is not called. It assumes that we put columns that we want in the column in the statement. So you can specify the columns there. If you select customers as a table, then you have the callback mechanism or the database table that provides the column information. Okay, let's see. If you want, you can do parameters. It works like ADS. So you can include, depending on the database, question marks or other characters in the query, and then use this dbinfo function to set the parameters. ADS works the same. Okay, I think I did do things a bit in the incorrect order, but I already mentioned metadata, and in table mode, we saw the callback, but you can also use an INI file or the database. And let me open. No, I'll show that in a minute. Now, assume nobody of you will start from scratch, and terminal samples are really not so interesting. So what I wanted to do from now on is take an existing program, port it from, in this case, VO to XSharp, and then migrate the data to the database and change the sample to use the RDD. So this is also the sample that I've included in the zip file for the beta. So let's see where my VO is. Okay. This is Visual Objects 2.8 Service Pack 3. I'm using this one because that's the one that I worked on. So I know exactly what it does. And the sample that I have is a fairly old sample. As you can see in the help about, it says, no, it doesn't. But in the resource, where is it? This one says 1996, so it's kind of old, but it is a nice small sample. It has a tree view, list view kind of thing. This is really a tree view. This is a list view. It uses the tables from the GS tutor folder, the samples. Internally, there are two data servers. These are designed with the server editor. But you can see there's a server here for the customer table, and it has the location of the samples in there. And it has a generated field desk array, so it generates the field names and their field specs. There's an index list, which says this table has custom name as an index, and this is the index name, and this is the index expression. And then we have another table called orders. It has the orders DBF, and it also has this thing. So I think it's nice. It's a fairly simple sample. The data explorer in the constructor says this is the class name for the tree view and the class name for the list view. And in here, it creates a server info object. Where is it? Oh, that gets initialized in the start function, I think. Yeah, in here it says we have the customer table, so it's the name of the class, the name of the orders class, and the key that links the tree view with the list view. And in the tree view, it shows the last name and first name column, and in the list view, it shows basically all the columns. So how would we do this if we want to move this to .NET? Now let's go to my Visual Studio. To do that, most of you have done this already, report it. So I use the VO exporter. I'm only exporting it to VS because I'm not so fluent with XIDE, but of course it works with XIDE too. I'm running the exporter, and I'm going to open the project. And I'm going to run it. And it fails. Now, why does it fail? Now, as you can see in the call stack, it fails because it cannot load library Kato split window DLL. This is not an XSharp problem. This is a problem of the VO GUI classes that it has an external dependency. And what we need to do, and I've already have the file in my folder, is include the Kato 3 SPL. And for some reason, I'm not sure why, but I need to tell it to copy it to the output folder if it doesn't exist. And now it runs. As you can see, it works. What I didn't show is you can double click and edit it. This is a generated data window, and which has direct links to the DBF. So if I change this date to today, you can see it also immediately updated in the data list view because it gets a notify event, notify field change, and that updates the column. That works. What you can do is you can add a new order. It fills in the number. And the heat is in the list. And finally, let's delete number 13. You can delete it and it gets deleted from the list. So what's behind here is a DB server class and GUI classes, etc. Now I would like to change this to use the SQL RDD. That means that we need to move the tables to SQL and we need to change the sample because this particular sample has hard-coded in the data servers layer, that is DBF NTX. So what I'm going to do now first is open the sample that I've included with the beta 1. And first thing I want to do is I want to write some code to create the database and to move the tables to the database. So this also shows you the SQL RDD in action because I'm using the SQL RDD. So the first function in here, let's increase the font a bit. It's called create database, and I tell it to use the SQL Server provider, and then I'm going to open the connection. Now this returns a handle. This is the model that ADS had, but what I'd like to do is I'd like to use the object that is behind it. So RDD has a function called SQLDB get connection, and it returns an object of type SQLDB connection. This SQLDB connection has methods where you can query, execute queries that return a value, or you can have execute queries that do not return a value or return a table. And in this case, I want to use, this is SQL Server specific. How many databases are there with the name T database, which is different. Now I'm going to use a new name here because I don't want to kill the table that I already have. So this is going to create a new database GSTutor demo. And then after that, I'm going to call fill GSTutor, which uses the same database, but then again fetches the connection. But as you see now, I'm doing something special. I'm assigning what's called the SQL metadata provider. And this is the one that gets the information from the database. Because I do that, it will also prepare the database so it has special tables where the tables and index information can be stored. Okay, I'm going to set the RDD, and then I'm going to ask, this is a method that we coded in the connection, does table exist? Because you cannot use the file function because the file is in the database, so you have no access. Now, of course, you could do the special SQL syntax, and in the SQL Server, there will be select star from sysdb objects or sys objects. The Dutch table exists uses a generic A.NET mechanism where it fetches metadata from the database and asks for the list of tables, and we filter that to see if the customer table exists. If not, I'm going to use the example via dbf@dx. I need to do the via because I've set the default to SQL RDD. Then I'm setting the index, and I'm getting the order key for each of the indexes. Now the sample doesn't use custom, it only uses custom name, but I'll just want to have both of the indexes in there. And then I'm going to use the normal db copy or the copy to command to copy the data over. So this will automatically create the database, so it create the table and evaluate the source, and for each record in the source do an append and do field puts for all the columns. And then I'm going to use the customer, which is now, because the default is SQL RDD, is going to use the customer table on the server and call ord create to create indexes. So this should somehow create indexes on the server. Now, I know that one of the index expressions, custom name, has last name plus first name. That's not a valid index expression for SQL Server, but it's going to somehow convert that into something that SQL Server knows. I'm doing the same for orders, so I'm opening it, getting the information, and then copying it over. And what I have here is an event handler. So I'm going to let's run this and see what happens. Let's set a breakpoint here. As you can see, we have a connection string. Then we have an execute scalar. This is exactly what the code in create database does. And it says create a database because apparently there are no databases with the name GSTutor demo. It's going to create the database, and then it's going to, I'm not sure why we have an error here, but we see that it does a create table statement, customers, and it creates some other stuff, and then it gets a drop index and create table orders, etc. I'm not sure what happened here, but let me see. In the SQL Server now, There's now a GS Tutor demo with the tables, and there's a customers table, and you see the same customers that we know from the samples from VO. We have the and we have orders table. Now in my sample there was a problem. I know, not sure why, but in the GS Tutor that I've run yesterday, it is missing. So let's check if I can do it there. It looks like I have a problem. I've changed something. This is not good. This worked before the latest update. This is not good. Don't you like it when the sample fails? Well, let's first see what I did in the Data Explorer sample to make it work with SQL Server. Then I'll show what happens with the orders table. Again, this was generated code. So the change that I had to make is make sure that SQL RDD is the driver for the database. In this particular application, I've marked all the changes with this comment. And you can see there's only in the start PRG and in the data servers. In the start PRG, I've added some code to connect to the database and give it the database provider, metadata provider, and I have an event handler. And of course, I have a finally to close the connection. And in the data server, I have added a change to set the order. The original one assumed that NTX files were used for orders. The way we do it in the database is that we emulate CDXs. So that's why you cannot use the, well, in this case, it does a find, but there is no index physically on this. So we cannot use the result of the find. And that's why I've said, okay, I'm setting the order just to one to make sure that I have an order. I'm doing that for both the orders table and the customers table. Now, since the copy of the data failed, the sample will show empty orders, but you can see that at least the customers has worked. The feature here, show all the fields. Why doesn't that work? Should work. It worked yesterday. No, it doesn't. Oh, come on. This is one of those days. At least you see that the adding stuff works, but there seems to be a problem with the date columns. Now it works. So, and the filter works. So basically, didn't change much in the logic, except that now somehow I need to make sure that my code to fill the database was wrong, and it works. The rest of the logic is unchanged. If you're going to look what happens you will see something strange. And let's open this delete it. If you look at the, I'm not sure if I can increase the font, but if you look at the queries here, you will see a query where custom greater equals 2 and less equals 6. And in the next line it says greater equals 2 and less than equals 2. So what this particular sample does is it uses ORD scope to filter the where is it? Order scope. As you can see, it sets the top scope and then the bottom scope. And inside the DB server class, the order scope method doesn't go top. So since we're setting top scope and then bottom scope, we're actually doing a go top twice. So this produces two selects, which is not perfect, but it works. But it is not something that we can solve in the RDD because it is the class that controls the RDD. And apparently for DBF files, this doesn't hurt. And you're not aware of the fact that it doesn't go top twice, although it only needs to do a go top once. But in the SQL environment, you can actually see it doing two go tops and two, which is kind of stupid. Okay, we can live with that. Any questions so far? Oh, if you have a question, you have to put your mic on because your mics are by default disabled.
Or you can write in the chat.
Yeah, you can also use the chat. Right, you're right. Okay. Now the question is, of course, why does this copy code not work? Let me see. Could be this one. I'm not sure. No, it's not. Okay, shall we debug this? You guys want to see what it is? I want to see what it is. But it's a bit out of the scope of this session. But
Well, maybe spend a minute or two if you can find it. Otherwise,
I can probably find it, yeah. Let me open another window. Yeah. Okay. Come on. Visual Studio gets slow if you're online. And I'm not sure why it's compiling all that. There's the problem. Why is super delete? This is incorrect. You should never call delete. That doesn't make sense. RDD work area transfer. Now this is something that's too much for this, I think. Okay. The problem is now that I'm loading still some stuff from the Oh, I see. The original DBF, for some reason, now has a deleted record. And apparently that doesn't work the way I want it to work. I have killed, and this is something I didn't really think of. Let me copy the sample file over from another folder. Now it works. Aha. Let's go back. Okay, so the problem, to explain what happened, is that the code that converts the data was writing each column and then doing a delete. And at this moment, so it actually did an append, followed by field puts, followed by a delete. And at this moment, the RDD, when it does a delete, wants to delete the row from the server, but the row on the server doesn't exist yet at the moment that you delete it, because it was just appended and the append wasn't committed yet. So this could be a problem if you do not emulate the deleted column the way DBFs have it. In the DBF, the deleted is basically an extra column that has a true or false in there. And if you do that for a SQL Server or for any SQL database, you can also emulate the deleted. It would have worked, but since we are not emulating deleted, the RDD wants to physically delete the row, but it doesn't exist yet on the server. That's why the delete statement fails. Now that I have my source database didn't have any deleted records this time, now it works. It says now that all the tables exist. And if I go to the Data Explorer, okay, now I have to, okay, there we go again. I have to make sure that I have everything in the assembly cache. So I'm adding all the XSharp assemblies now to the GAC, because I am not actually, well, it's either you copy them to the output folder or you include them in the cache. And I hadn't copied them, so, but now it works, as you can see. So the problem with the conversion code was appending a row that's deleted. I will have a look at that. I'll make a note that I will fix that. So but the rest works. So like we saw before, you can edit. This is linked, so you see the column as immediately changes to 29th of February. And if I change the order number to 66, you will see it gets changed. So that works everything. Now, to give you an idea of the metadata in the server, in this particular situation, I have a table called X table info. And over here, we say the key columns are order num and custom. So if we update something, the RDD will do an update, and we should see a update somewhere. Let's try it again. So I update the date only. And now we see an update statement. This is small, but it says update order, set order date equals at P1, which is the syntax for SQL Server, where custom equals O1. This means original value 1, and order num equals original value 2. And then it does a select row count, and it sends in a date time value of the 9th of February. O1 is 2 and O2 is 3, which are the column custom number and order number. So because I've specified in my table here that order num and custom are the key columns, the update statement will use that. You can also see that it has an index column, customer and orders. These are like what you call production indexes for SQL Server. And in my table index info, I have the table name and the customer name, the ordinal, which specifies in which order they need to be loaded, and it says cust name has the expression last name plus first name, and cust num has the expression cust num, and you see the indexes for orders are also simple order num and cust num. And if you look at the sample again, and then let's clear this. You see that the SQL statement is order by last name, comma, first name. So the expression last name plus first name, it gets converted by the RDD to a order by with last name, comma, first name. So the RDD is smart enough to parse the expression and extract the column names and use it like that. And you can see in the it also uses the metadata to query for metadata. So it queries for the table and info and the index info for orders, and that's used by the RDD. Okay. If you are going to do seeks, etc., you will see the RDD translates the seek again into a where clause, and it has code internally to translate functions. Now let me have a quick look at the code in the RDD. I can probably better open it in the large font version. You can see we have a folder here in the X SQL RDD that has different providers. For example, the Postgres SQL. Is it? And this was a contribution from Andreas from Wolfgang's company. And like I mentioned before, it has a property DLL name. So this is apparently, I don't know, this is the name of the Postgres .NET DLL, and it has a factory class. You see, it also overrides some other properties, like how do you get the identity if you have an identity column? How do you get the number of rows? What is a top statement? In this case, apparently the keyword is limit. And what we see here is a table that says X-based function string needs to be translated like this into the syntax for Postgres. If you look at SQL Server, for example, it has a similar table, and you see that it has, for example, EEF expression gets translated to a case when blah blah blah. A date to string gets converted to convert char8, 11, which is the format indicating for decimal, 4 numbers year, 2 numbers month, 2 number day. By adding this, if you do a seek or etc., this will be used to produce the right where clause. I think it's too far now to show all these details in this session, but you get the idea. The metadata, let me show you that. I have a sample here, which I haven't included yet. You can also use this metadata. You can use an INI file for that. And the INI file has the format that you can have a section with default values, and it has sections per table. And this name is the real name, basically. And we have a section for the index, which says which tags should we emulate. And it's primary key, company name, contact name, address. And these are the expressions for these tags. So in case when I do a seek, or it should translate this so that the expression works properly. So in the SQL Server, it knows how to translate upper, and upper is a function for SQL Server, so there's no translation. But other databases may have a translation for upper. I'm not sure which, but I do know that there is. No, apparently not. It helps if I do entire solution. Like you see over here, if you use ODBC, then it is accolade fn UKs. So curly bracket, what is it? Curly bracket function UK close curly bracket. So that's the translation. So per provider, you can specify how to work this. I'm not familiar with all the functions. So you have to see. And of course, it depends on what you use in your code. I can show you how this works. I have, let's see. Test. In this case, you see, I do not specify a, okay, yeah, I specify the metadata provider database. So this will use the database provider. If I don't do that, it should use the INI file. And as you can see, this now has read the 4 tags from the INI file. And let me check that code. So first it does set index, and then it says order by upper country plus upper city. You can see which was the index expression. I think we have an order by, this trigger set deleted. Now we have order by address, which does an order by clause, and it uses that. We have a seek. So we have, oh, in the code it says set order primary key, PK. It does a seek elf key, and as a result, it only finds one row where the key is elf key. There's a big difference with DBS. If you seek in SQL RDD, you will get a result set with only matches the row that matches the expression that you seek for, unless you do soft seek, because in that case it does a greater equals. So over here you see it does an elf key seek followed by a curl, whatever it stands for. and that returns over here. Now we have a list of with a scope. We set the scope to Brazil and Canada, and then we have an event that says upper country plus upper city greater equals Brazil, and upper country plus upper city less equals Canada, ordered by country plus upper city, etc. And then we see here creating an index. It now adds, if you do a DB create index, it'll translate a drop index followed by a create index. And as you can see now, it has two new tags, city and name, which has the expression city and contact name. Okay. Any questions? I know there's a lot. You guys would help me a lot if you would start testing it and with your database, and if you would report successes or failures with the RDD with your database. If you need support for the database that we haven't provided yet, let me know, and we'll create a provider together. If you can give me the ADO.NET provider, I can figure out what the factory name is that we need to include, and we can probably together on the internet in the documentation find how the syntax is for example, selecting the latest generated key, selected the number of rows that were affected by the last operation, and how to translate X-based functions into the functions for that particular database. I'm not sure if you guys thought it was interesting. It's kind of quiet. I'm not sure if there was a lot of chats, but I see a question. I get an object reference not set to an instance of object when running DB copy. Yeah, look, I need an example of that. It is possible that I had a problem too, where I was copying over to something that was deleted. It's most likely that that is something you have to, and I will fix that, of course. I already made a note that an append, a field put, and a delete on the same row will work. Yeah, it was in my sample. Yeah. Most likely, if you make sure that there's no deleted rows in your table and you do this code that fills the database, you should not see the problem. And like Wolfgang says, you need to play with it using your own apps. That's the only way to do it. And yeah, I'm pretty sure that you will find problems that we haven't seen yet. Let me know and we'll fix it. It helps if you're using not one of the databases that we have to give us the data to. If it's data, so we can see whether it's data related or not. The problem that I had with the DB copy in my sample was data related. DBF had a deleted row. So yeah, maybe I should have done set deleted row before doing the DB copy. So that's why it's useful to see the source code and the data file that you're working with. Okay. If there are no questions now, give it a go, test it, and let me know. I will edit this session and put it online in our YouTube channel, so people who missed this session can see it online too. We still have some things that we want to work on ourselves, so we will work on the RDD too. And I would say I expect a second beta end of next week, something like that. At least with a fix for the issue that I found today, but most likely also for other issues. What I didn't show is how rec no column works, how deleted column works. It is documented. I recommend that you have a look at the documentation. I'll give you a brief sample of that. So we have a help file. The main HAL is SQL RDD, which includes the class reference, but we did try to describe how things work. And for example, like I said, for the metadata, each of the columns that you can specify are in there. The database structure is there. Default value for things are listed. And if you want to see the complete structure of the classes, etc., there were no secrets in there. For completeness, this documentation also includes some of the types that are not part of the SQL RDD, but that we inherit from. So the SQL RDD under the hood, as you can see in the documentation, inherits from DBF Visual Fox Pro. So it is, we did that because we want to be able to produce local indexes on files, and those local indexes will be created with the CDX driver. So you can do a select star from customers, so with a query, and then create an index locally on the result set if you want. And that's why, in that case, we use the DBF VFP. We also use the DBF driver to emulate deleted flag, because if you're internally, we have an ADO.NET data table where we have the data. So basically, the data you retrieve from the SQL is stayed in memory, but for each row that we have in this table, we have a 1 byte row in the DBF that we generate, and this 1 byte row has then deleted flag. So we can emulate deleted without actually deleting the row from the ADO.NET data table. So that, and the whole trick of emulating deleted is a bit tricky. If you have ideas how we can improve things, we have no secret. All our code is in our public repository on GitHub. Please let us know, because we have solutions for some problems, but there may be better solutions. You guys may have an idea of how you can solve things. Yeah, like I said, the DBFs of the SQL RDD inherits from DBF VFP. What we do is we generate a temporary DBF file in your temp folder, your local app data temp folder. And if you close the work area, it deletes the table. Of course, if your system crashes, it may not delete the table, but that shouldn't be a problem because we generate unique table names. In the worst case, you have some files in that folder that you can delete if you want. Okay, that's it for now then. If there are no other questions, then we'll stop. Let me see if I have something more in the PowerPoint. Yeah, this is. That's about it, yeah. So if there are no other questions, then I would like to thank you for your attention. And let's stop sharing so that we see the screen. And yeah, have a good day. Please let us know what you think. If you find problems, let us know. We'll try to fix them as soon as possible. And yeah, the PowerPoint is not available, but I will put it on the website in the SQL RDD folder, so you can see it there too. But most of what I said in the PowerPoint is the help file as well. Okay, thanks a lot. Have a nice day, and yeah, please use the private forum for the SQL RDD if you have any feedback. That's the recommended place. Thanks a lot, and bye-bye.
Yeah, goodbye.